All right, so here's a quick background on the USICA. The USICA exists really as a merger of a couple of pieces of legislation, some major and some minor. The two biggest contributors to the provisions that we're going to be talking about today in the USICA are the Endless Frontier Act and the Chips for America Act. The Endless Frontier Act establishes a technology directorate for the NSF, which helps develop technologies that would be more applicable to industry, whereas the NSF's traditional area of operations is basic research. So this was originally funded at a significantly higher level in the Endless Frontier Act's original form. And what happened was it got pared back and some of that funding got plowed back into traditional NSF activities, and then it got rolled into the USICA. And another important predecessor is the Chips for America Act, which establishes the Chips for America Fund, which stands for Creating Helpful Incentives for the Production of Semiconductors. And that's obviously a backronym meant to spell CHIPS. It funds basically incentives for manufacturing semiconductors throughout the United States, at new locations as well as mature production nodes. And then the USICA came along, it was written up rolling together these two plus a few other appropriations and regulatory bills that establish rules about various things. We're actually not going to discuss those parts. We're just going to do an impact analysis of these major appropriations. And it added a little additional funding for semiconductor production additionally on top of the Chips for America Act. And a few of the important backers of this bill include Chuck Schumer, obviously the Senate Majority Leader, Lindsey Graham, and Mitt Romney. It passed the Senate with pretty broad bipartisan support. It's received endorsement from Joe Biden, and it's widely expected to be passed into law within the summer or at least the end of this year. All right, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to talk you through some of the key motives behind the USICA. On the R&D side, there's a desire to bolster the United States' competitive advantage in technological sort of frontier areas, especially vis-a-vis China, and generally keep the US at pace with the rest of the world in key frontier technologies. There's also the chip manufacturing area, which obviously ties naturally into that. It's meant to additionally address the semiconductor shortage, which is introducing considerable price instability into certain goods markets right now, including automobiles and computers. I think some of you may have seen in local papers, prices for used cars are really high right now. And just to sort of address those things and to bring some of the what are perceived to be overextended supply chains back home to the United States to improve our sort of resilience in the face of crisis, policymakers are looking at expanding semiconductor manufacturing within the US and generally reinvigorate the manufacturing sector within our borders. And there's this other part of the bill, which is the regional innovation hubs, and it has its own set of motives, which are generally to expand the US's capacity to innovate and develop new technologies by involving more of the population and geography of the United States in the technology development and innovation processes. And it's also meant to broaden the distribution of gains from the IT revolution, which obviously created a lot of wealth, a lot of well-paid jobs, but those are at least perceived to be concentrated in specific areas, i.e. the Boss Wash corridor on the East Coast and the whole sort of West Coast area, spanning from Seattle down to sort of Los Angeles and the rest of Southern California. All right, so now I'm going to talk you through some of the key provisions in the bill. We're going to talk especially about funding appropriations because that's what we're modeling here. I'm going to just run through the chips and manufacturing part to start with. The CHIPS Act, obviously, it's got a lot of funding. I know it's a little bit sort of more complicated than the other provisions. It's just each funding level is associated with the year in its respective order. So the $24 billion would be for FY22, the $7 billion would be for FY23, and so on and so forth. The manufacturing extension partnership is just that the funding amount spread over the 5 years evenly, and that's the same for all of the rest. The manufacturing USA partnership and the semiconductor manufacturing at mature nodes. One exception to this is the 5G supply chain innovation, which is just meant to help the US sort of get ahead on producing 5G infrastructure within its own borders, and that's only the 1.5 billion in the fiscal year of 22. It's not in any other years. All right, so here's the first slide in the R&D appropriations. You'll notice this first large funding item here is 52 billion for pre-existing NSF activities. I want to emphasize that this is not in the model. We just wanted to make sure that you knew that it existed, and it's authorizing these sort of funds for the NSF. It is, as this does not authorize funds above base levels for coming fiscal years, it's not going to be modeled as a policy variable, because that would be basically double counting funding that was already projected to be spent by the government. You have your critical minerals grants, at the smallest line item we're going to have in the model. Again, all of these are spread evenly across the fiscal years. I just want to point out the technology directorate, obviously a pretty big item, meant to spur the development of applied technologies, help bring government sort of spending power to bear in helping industry become more technologically advanced. You have university R&D. Obviously, the U.S. has a very big university system, so that's a natural area where policymakers would want to park some money. And there's also STEM education and workforce development, which is just meant to get qualified people into those jobs that the policymakers are looking to create a labor force that's well adapted to the new conditions that these policies are meant to create. Here's some more R&D appropriations. R&D in key tech areas, technology test beds. That's sort of a thing that bears some explanation. That's just meant to create basically development and prototyping facilities so that the RDT&E process, that's research, development, testing, and evaluation, can be done, partly by the government, and that defrays some of the cost for private sector actors who may, benefit from technological developments in society, but it could be negative NPV at the firm level for them to do that. So these technology test beds help transfer some of that cost onto the government, and generally sort of make technological development easier at the societal scale. You could also see a very large item here is the Department of Energy R&D, obviously with a lot of national labs, a lot of other R&D facilities. Policymakers are going to want to park a lot of money there too, because they have a lot of pre-existing robust capabilities in this area. And here's last but not least, I know it looks a little pathetic compared to the rest of the slides, but it's a pretty decent sized funding item at 10 billion, and it's a very interesting one. That is our regional innovation hubs, and that's spread across multiple states in our model and is meant to be spread across multiple states in the legislation. It's supposed to create regional sort of innovation and technology hubs in areas that have been traditionally not as strong in the tech sector, sort of bring those high-tech jobs to areas that have been left behind in the 21st century economy, or at least that's what the policymakers want to achieve. All right, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about us at REMI and why we are uniquely well suited to assessing this sort of thing and preparing you and others for the impact of this legislation. So we are the nation's leading provider in dynamic policy modeling. We were founded in 1980 on the notion that policymakers should test out their policies and see the effects of them before they're made, so they're making more effective, more beneficial policies for their constituents. And we have clients all over the country at the local, state, and federal level. Here are just a few of them. This is not by no means an exhaustive list, but these are some of the more interesting ones in our opinion. And I'm going to transfer this over to Gaisha here to talk about the Tax-PI model and why it is such a good choice for this topic.
Yes, thank you, Jim. So the Tax-PI model is what's going to be our springboard in order to forecast the economic, fiscal, and as well as demographical effects of the USICA bill, because this model has the ability to forecast dynamically all of those effects and as well as the policy impacts. And I did want to note that this particular model is the only one that is widely available, and as well as decision makers rely on Tax-PI to demonstrate economic and as well as to make decisions within their budgets. So this particular graph that is to the right of the screen, this is well, I would say like it's an abstraction of how the model works. So there are a number of linkages. Like as you can see, there is output and demand to start off with, as well as population, labor and capital demand, compensation and costs, and market shares, which includes, your domestic and as well as like international shares. However, we're focusing our attention on state and as well as local government spending. And as you can see that is attached to outputs and as well as like investments. And then the reason why we're doing this is because today we want to observe, like just from an economic perspective, how the USICA will affect the population, as well as how much output they're going to generate from implementing these, this government funding, and as well as show you all how Tax-PI works because of the user calibration in which that the model displays. But we will explore that later in the model demonstration. And I did also want to note that some of the key Tax-PI policy variables include things such as sales tax, which affects the consumer prices, as well as corporate income tax, which affects production costs. But all of these things can be input into the model, and as well as shown like how they affect different factors of regions. And so why do we think that this was important? It was primarily because we wanted to, the reason why we thought that this was gravely important is because we wanted to give you all a sneak peek of the scope of upcoming opportunities in your region, especially if you live in an unconventional region that is not necessarily targeted for tech. And then this is also going to be used to show the boost in localized supply chains, and as well as regional tax benefits, and as lastly, the types of jobs that are going to be created from implementing these micro and as well as macro effects from this bill. And then so the next step of this process is going to be our model demonstration. Before we hop right into the Tax-PI software, I did want to give you all an overview of what to expect from the model. So in particularly, our inputs today are going to include the appropriations in which that Jim listed previously. So that includes 10 billion for innovation hubs, and as well as 72.2 billion for research and development, and as well as so on. And this is going to be over a period of 15 years. So I did want to emphasize, though, that we tried to get as precise as possible with the numbers. So therefore, some categories of the line items were combined, and also in order to forecast a real scenario, we divided the micro effects by the 5 states, since the bill didn't specify how things would be spread, and as well as to ensure that it would be as precise as possible in this particular scenario. The primary KPIs in which that we're going to be telling our story with is going to be population, and as well as labor supply, and as well as output. And the regional tech hubs for this demonstration is going to be in Alaska, New York, South Carolina, and Wyoming. But today, Wyoming and Utah. However, our live demo today is going to be with Utah. So I'm just going to switch to the Tax-PI model, and we'll get started from there. All right, so when you come into any REMI product, you are greeted with this nice tiled screen. And the best thing about this is the fact that it's very intuitive, and as well as very user-friendly. And I did want to emphasize that here at REMI, we approach economic modeling from a top-down, bottom-up approach. So in particular, you could see where the baselines are with the national and as well as regional forecasts. So for the state of Utah, the numbers in which that the numbers which that are displayed here. Okay, the numbers which that are displayed here are from the RSQE and as well as the Congressional Budget Office. So it really gives you the flexibility to explore your baseline and as well as to see what you will be working with before you decide to before you decide to implement a policy simulation. So I just want to give you all a sneak preview of that before we get started. And you can also do the same thing with your regional forecast as well. But in particularly for this presentation, what we decided to do was observe the effects of the bill throughout the regions. So this was divided into micro and as well as macro effects. So before we dig deeper into the specifics of the case study, I did want to emphasize that the bread and butter of Tax-PI is going to be the budgets, because this allows for states, local government, and as well as organizations to display how are their budgets going to be affected by different policy impacts. And then and it also gives you functionality to control, one second. So, and then also gives you functionality to control how, one second. So the greatest thing about the budget is that the fact that it gives you the functionality to not only implement your state's real revenues and as well as expenditures, but as well as to forecast them without any interference. So for example, for Utah's, just by the budget giving feedback to itself and as well as being attached to the different policy indicators and as well as the different variables, is able to derive these results. But for the budget in particular today, we're actually going to use that to combine not only our macro effects, but as well as our micro effects to simulate what's going to happen in the region for Utah. So with that being said, I'm just going to show you all the results from our macro effects. And so the reason why this is so important is because since the regional is informed by the national, so for example, if Utah hypothetically had an automobile plant that was going to come and make like huge economic impact, that wouldn't necessarily inform the national control. But however, since we have lots of investments such as in education and as well as, and then I'll show them here on you all's inputs list. So such as in education and as well as in test beds and with the incentives for chips on a macro scale and as well as for the telecom infrastructure, it became gravely important to forecast them on a national level since these particular effects just won't affect particular regions. And so I'm just going to scroll over, and as you all can see that that for the telecom infrastructure budget line of the bill, we put this 1.5 represents the 1.5 billion budget line. And then so from here, since we manipulated our baseline from the RSQ, from the RSQE to illustrate the bill. This is what we are starting with at first before we implement the micro effects, and particularly in Utah. So we're just going to click out of this. And then so for the micro effects for Utah, all of the appropriations, again, were divided by five in order to reflect like the even spread between the states. So this just kind of gives you all a summary of how the categories of the policy variables were chosen, and as well as to see some of the combinations. So as far as for our results, wise, so the primary story in which that I want to tell here, it starts with output and demand. So we're going to go to our analytical graphs here. And in particular, I like to, and then in particular with our comparison type, we're going to start with differences. And then as we can see from the graphs here, is that with self-supply, which just basically means whether or not that the goods that were produced stayed in the region. Initially, when the money was being dumped by the Fed, it did. However, as time progressed, particularly in 2025, and actually the total opposite. And then we can also observe the fact that the exports stayed the same throughout the entire observed period. And however, the exports to the rest of the nation did begin to decrease. And then the next part of this, in which I want to take you all to, is the population and as well as labor supply. And so from here, we observe that in that beginning in 2020, that beginning in 2024, 25 in particular, is when the population started to decrease. And then this is primarily due to from starting between at 2022. This is when you had a decrease of economic migrants. However, for Utah's total economic summary, this is this can be seen as being quite in effect, considering the fact that it had some pretty positive changes on the economy up until the funding stopped in 2026, which was expected. Then the next thing in which that I'm going to show you all is the labor supply by the gender, just so we can see the availability of labor. And so from here, we're going to show it graphically, and we're going to do this by differences, just to stay with the baseline assumption. And so again, it tells the same story that in 2025, this is when the labor force availability began to dip after the funding stopped. And so we can tie all this in with not only by the budget and as well as the expenditures, but as well as by the consumer prices. Because as we would expect, is that when you have higher demand, prices are going to increase, and plus you also have a larger population, and especially those who now have a higher paying tech jobs in tech. And then we're going to also view that in employment by industry. And then so again, we're going to show consumer prices by percent change. And so this shows that although that like when the funding stopped in 2026, in 2027 next year, prices started to go down for relatively all commodities. And this is seen as a ripple effect across consumer prices within the economy. And then so for us to see what type of jobs in which that were available, we're just going to pull up our employment by industry chart. And we're going to measure this particular one by differences. I'm just waiting for this one to load. And then again, we're going to show this in a chart as well. And particularly with a bar chart, so we can highlight which industries are more prevalent, and instead of levels, we're going to use differences. So we'll know which grew. So in this particular analysis in 2022, the particular industries that stand out the most are definitely manufacturing, as well as professional, scientific, and technical services, and as well as computer and electronic product manufacturing. However, those that decreased the most was state and local government. And then we see this trend as the years come along. And then in 2026, the only the only industry in which they had a positive difference in jobs was the professional scientific services. However, after the funding ceased, the largest industries that lost jobs, that lost employment was state and local government. Local government is what will stay in local government. So most government jobs, and as well as in construction, paper manufacturing, real estate, and just a host of others, especially in healthcare and social assistance. And so this brings us back to how this affected the whole economy, which is in particular with our budget. So for Utah's budget, this can be shown through our graph here, just for a better visual. So as we can see that briefly, Utah experienced a budget deficit as its expenditures outweighed its revenues. However, throughout the years of our observed period, the total revenues and as well as expenditures have converged. So they have broke even, whether that's slightly or they just had like very minor differences. So although the expenditures are increasing and the revenues are, but the revenues are also increasing as well. So depending upon how one would choose to look at this, this can be seen as a win. But we also want to know, where are these revenues coming from? And then so from here, we're able to observe these things. So I'm just going to show our legend here. So it seems as if that our biggest revenues are coming from federal funds, as expected, especially since this is observing the effects of the USICA Act. The second one is the education fund as well. And then the third largest is the general fund. Now, spending is also a large part of the increased so spending is also, so spending is also something in which that we have to be very aware of here. So in particular, our results show us that spending is particularly coming from social services, as well as public education, and lastly, higher education, which were all pretty much expected, especially since as the population increases, especially with the economic migrants steadily flowing into the area to meet the demand of the new influx of jobs in this area is expected. And then so this, and then I did also want to give some other effects of Tax-PI. So if you wanted to explore more or to kind of fine tune your results, such as exploring more economic tables and as well as demographic tables, Tax-PI also allows you to do that. And now we'll head back to the presentation. And now, one thing in which that I did want to emphasize is the fact that the reason why I decided to illustrate Utah is so that you all could have somewhat of a comparison point once the other notable results are shown. And so these notable, and then so we decided to choose states and different regions of the United States in order to show how this bill would impact different regions differently. And so in particularly, one of our key states was Alaska. And then so as you all can see, when the funding was first implemented in Alaska in 2002, there was a budget surplus. However, this did turn into a budget deficit, as the total expenditures is represented by the yellow line, and then the revenues are represented by the blue line. And then this is primarily attributed to the University of Alaska, as well as the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education and Early Services. And then the largest revenue sources were the federal funds, as well as investment revenues and petroleum. Our next set of significant results from Alaska was also noted by the significant decrease in the employment population and as well as labor force after the suspension. After the suspension of funding. And then again, this is also noted by the previous graph, which aligns with these results as well. Then our second state in which that we wanted to display was Wyoming. And as you all can see, is that for the first couple of years, all the way up until about 2034, Wyoming actually experienced a budget deficit as well. However, in the long run, it did experience a budget surplus. And then its largest revenue sources were from state sales and use taxes, property taxes, and as well as the federal mineral reserves. However, its significant expenditures were in education, health, and higher education. And then from this particular result, we could see that Wyoming benefited greatly, because although the expenditures did continue to scale, but so did the revenues, which after time outweighed the expenditures. The next state in which that we decided to use was New York, just to be, well, just to get like a reflection of the northern states. And so from this graph, we can see that before, New York was running a significant budget deficit. However, when the federal funding was implemented, the expenditures and as well as revenues converged. However, around 2025 is when you see New York's revenues start to outweigh the expenditures, and then in 2036 is when you start to see like a greater like impact of the revenues. And then again, the primary source of this was personal income taxes, usage tax, business taxes. And then so we can attribute this to the expansion of the economy, and especially the investments in the tech sector, and as well as a semiconductor chip manufacturing. And then there are significant expenditures where education, health, and as well as social welfare, which again can be attributed to higher population higher population levels, but then this also contributes to the revenues because you have a bigger base to extract from. And then so for New York's, and then so like for New York's like income projections, we see that New York's personal income increased over 100% over a 15-year period. And as well as the real disposable income increased just a little over 25%, and the personal taxes did the same thing as well. Everything is steady, including the price index, which barely reached about 15%. But one thing in which that decision makers could extrapolate from this particular graph is the fact that if you have software such as Tax-PI, that you're able to extract this information, as well as have the awareness of potentially increasing your tax margins by a bit. If you're aware of the personal income projections in which that the citizens citizens or like organizations the citizens or the organizations that may house in this state have to pull from. And then our last state is going to be South Carolina. So as you all can see, that South Carolina actually actually experienced a boom as it had a budget surplus between 2022 and as well as 2032. However, was not able to sustain that starting in 2032. And a big reason for that was because of K through 12 education, economic development, and as well as their spending in higher education. However, their significant source of revenues were pulled from their earnings on investments, their sales and use tax, and as well as their individual income tax. And then so this just shows over the years the significant decrease in the labor supply to accommodate the new high-paying jobs, but yet you didn't see but yet you don't see it increasing until, or rather rebounding until 2028. And one could contribute this to the fact that most of the high-paying jobs require a very particular skill set. and then which is why most of their investments went to education, as with other states as well. And then so the last thing in which that we're going to do this presentation before the question and answers portion is discuss our conclusions. So one thing in which that we did observe in all of the regions of, so one thing in which that we did observe in all of the regions was the increase in tax revenues, and particularly in federal funding and university funds being the primary source of those new revenue sources. So this is primarily stimulated by the federal government, or rather the national control in which that was implemented, and as well as that investment revenue steadily rose at an average rate of 3% for all states between fiscal years 2022 and as well as 2028. However, they did subsequently fall across the board around 2030, or even significantly after the funding was stopped. And then so this brings us to the primary problem here, which is sustaining this type of like economic flow of investments for the long term. And then so this is exactly why states need software such as Tax-PI in order to consistently be aware of what's happening, and also so industrial investments just won't go, well, rather like the benefits of industrial investments just won't deteriorate after the federal funding has ceased. And it also makes us question, like, how will states make up for the budget shortfalls after the funds are taken away?
Yeah, and a few other conclusions we had were that chip manufacturing obviously became a major sector in all states observed, because there's a lot of funding put into it, and obviously there's a very high job growth in that sector in the years in which the money was being disbursed. And also there was increased population due to economic migration and significant accretion of jobs in the high-tech sector. Also, there's long-term reductions in production costs. That's after 2030. The production costs sort of decrease on around 1 to 5% in all states. And but before then, there's significant production cost increases. Is probably due to the investment of the money, rising labor costs in those areas, and yeah, just the costs of production go up a lot in the first years while the funding is being dispersed in the immediate aftermath, and then afterwards it begins to fall off. And now I'm going to run through some reasons why economic modeling is very important for a variety of actors in the policy sphere. So it can help governments understand the effects of policies before they happen. So whether or not you're in favor or against industrial policy legislation like this, it will help you understand what's likely to happen in your locality and how you should react to it. Say you're a rentier state like Alaska, whose revenues are not tied to your population or your labor stock as much. Well, you may want to consider tying your revenue streams more significantly to your population stock. Having a more, having an income tax system that allows you to capitalize on growth in employment and economic in-migration. And using projections like this can illustrate problems for states like that and can sort of suggest possible solutions. Additionally, bidders for contracts for things, contracts and grants from USICA funding items would want to be able to demonstrate that their projects are accretive to local economies, that they benefit their host communities. So having economic models can show that not only are you creating jobs for local areas, but you're also contributing to state tax revenues, so you can get the necessary political backing to win these contracts and these grants, and sort of make these projects come to fruition. Policy organizations and regional planners also benefit a lot from economic planning because they need to sell their policy plans, whether or not they be for ideological reasons or based on sort of regional studies, to key stakeholders like constituents or legislators, and having that quantitative rigor in your policy proposals definitely adds a lot of weight and credibility to these proposals and makes it easier to get them through. Or if you're on the other side and don't think they're such a good idea, if there are significant costs that are quantitatively observed, then having those shown in such an empirical fashion can help build pushback against it. So really, economic modeling is just useful across the board for actors throughout the United States economy, just to remain competitive in this age and to adopt the best practices for their localities and to understand the trends that will be affecting them in the years to come, especially from sort of big ticket legislation like this.